The challenge for me was to not just decide, oh, I'm older now and it's not going to work. I'm older now and this is what happens. There was this thing in me that was like, okay, that may be true, but can you go into a process and to stay alive in the process? Because your runway is shorter and you have to take that into consideration, but it's still important to be in the process of living.
Hailed by the Washington Post as one of Nashville's finest song interpreters, Americana and country music artist Kathy Mattea has amassed Grammys, CMAs, gold albums, hit singles, and a platinum collection of her greatest hits. She's recorded country, folk, Celtic, gospel, and bluegrass music, but her performance dream nearly ended when in her 50s, her voice started to change. Kathy Mattea demonstrates how perseverance, tenacity, faith, and the power of music can guide us in our life journey.
We're glad you joined us to hear these inspiring stories from older adults, people who have so much experience and words of wisdom to share, but are sometimes overlooked in society today. I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, a Nashville-based nonprofit. Our mission is to support, champion, and enhance the lives of those 50 and older.
And I'm Susan Sizemore, your guide through these beautiful conversations with those who are living life to the fullest and who know how to squeeze the day in their second chapter of life. Now, in my second chapter and encore career, I'm following my passion for sharing the stories of older adults with you and with the world. If you like what you hear, please rate and follow Squeeze the Day on your favorite podcast platform. Today's Squeeze the Day is brought to you by the All of Us Research Program from the National Institutes of Health. Learn how you can help change the future of health by participating in the program. Visit www.joinallofus.org to learn more. Welcome to Squeeze the Day.
Thank you very much.
From the moment I heard your voice in the early 1980s, I remember loving your folksy presentation and soothing, unique voice. It looks like I was not alone. I found in my research that in the late 1980s, the LA Times called you a performer of limitless potential. The Washington Post hailed you as one of Nashville's finest song interpreters, and People magazine described you as warm, strong, smart, and generally splendid. What heartwarming words. How did they impact you?
You know, there's so many stages to this. If you get to do this for a living, there's that like, oh, I'm going to get my shot. Like when I came up, this technology was expensive to go record. So the first thing that happened was it's like, will I get a record deal? And then if you get lucky enough to get a record deal, then it's like, well, I'm going to get a shot. Someone's going to get to hear me. And then it's like, well, will the timing be right? Will my taste, does the music that I want to sing land with other people? And so I think probably the best way for me to answer that is to say it was validating to think that the music that was giving me juice was like landing that way with other people too.
Mm-hmm. And your music it transcends so many different genres. And I want to talk to you about that a little bit later, but I read somewhere recently that in your 50s, your voice started to change, and that's something that I thought was an interesting thing, considering we're talking a lot to older adults over 50 who have inspiring stories. So you describe that as the dark night of the soul, and I know it had to force you to change your life and your career and your process to just ensure you could continue to perform. So I want you to talk a little bit about that and realities of the changes of life as we age.
Yeah, it happened gradually, kind of. And I would be on stage and I would go for some note that I'd been singing for 30 years in some song, and then it wouldn't come out. And I'd think, oh, I'll think about that point in that song tomorrow night. I'll think about it tomorrow, and I'll really lean into it. I'll pay attention. And it was the same thing would happen. And then maybe the next night it would be there, and I didn't know what the difference was. And there was a point where I couldn't kind of run away from it or sweep it under the rug anymore. It was like, I'm going to have to turn around and look straight at this. And just for context, I had a voice teacher for 30 years that I found when I was 19. So I was a person who took good care of myself, exercise, eat well, all the things. And so it was scary, devastating, but there was a moment when I was at an event in the 90s, and I wound up at a star-studded party, and I felt way out of my league. So I went to a corner to just sort of observe from afar. And when I got there, Tony Bennett was standing there
Oh my gosh.
by the fire escape. And I said, "Can I ask you a question?" And he said, "Yeah." I said, "I heard you sing tonight, and I know how old you are. How did you do that?" He was 78 at the time. And he just looked at the floor and smiled, and he kind of took a deep breath, and then he looked back up at me and he said, "Well, my voice isn't what it once was,
Ah,
but it's a lot better than it was a couple years ago." He said, "I found a teacher and I started working again, and it's made a difference." And I remembered that conversation, and I thought, okay, I'm not going to go down without a fight. I'm going to find out whether my voice can be salvaged. And if it can, I'm going to keep going. And if it can't, I'm going to stop. So I found this teacher out of Minneapolis, and I called her up and I just said, "I need help." And we worked for about 3 years. And it changed everything for me. I had to relearn to sing. What I know now, what I believe happened is that, because I have an alto voice, so my vocal cords are in their sweet spot. They're kind of far apart and they vibrate slow. Well, over time, some women especially have their vocal cords slowly move a little bit further apart. So with my voice, it changes the way everything feels when I sing. I had to get to know my voice again. So I had this moment where I went from thinking, "Oh, I don't know, my voice, it's getting old, but it's still expressive. It's like an old Volvo. It's sturdy and it's dependable and it's classy." And then there was this point in the middle of working with her where I thought, "Oh, maybe it's a vintage Ferrari and I just don't know how to drive it yet." And that became like my little, mantra for myself.
what an amazing story. I love your analogies. And I hope that everyone can find a Tony Bennett in their life.
Yeah, I guess what I would say in the context of the people who might be listening to this interview, the challenge for me was to not just decide, "Oh, I'm older now and it's not going to work. I'm older now and this is what happens." There was this thing in me that was like, okay, that may be true, but can you go into a process? I'm telling you, I cried. I had moments of triumph. I'd have a moment where one week I could sing something, the next week's lesson I couldn't do it at all. I didn't know why. I mean, it was incredibly frustrating. It was hard, but it's like, at least at the end of it, I will know whether my voice has just gotten old and it's not salvageable and I have to go on, or I can still enjoy this. And I think that's the challenge as you get older, is like to stay alive in the process, because your runway is shorter and you don't know, and you have to take that into consideration. But it's still important to be in the process of living, for me.
Mm-hmm. Amen. I think, and for all of us, you can't, if you become complacent, then you let life kind of take over, and instead you can still mold yourself well into your later years, but sometimes you need different tools.
Yeah, and life is still life.
Yeah. So you did some living room jam sessions, and those, I think, were something that you used kind of during this difficult time in your life. Will you tell us a little bit about that?
Until COVID, I had a guitar player for 30 years, and so we would get together once a week just to go over old songs, sometimes freshen them up with a new arrangement, find a new song and sort of suss out a way into it before we added it into the show. And so we would meet every Tuesday afternoon. And when I started this process with this teacher, I was like, you know what? I need to sing songs I don't know. So I found old jazz standards and, old Appalachian songs and blues songs, stuff I would have never picked up otherwise, because I was like, I need to learn where the edges of my voice are. Mm. And so it wasn't always easy. And there were days where I would get really discouraged. But that process, I still have regular living room rehearsals with the guys. And when I find a new song, we get together and start trying to find a way to flesh it out so that the band can play on it. And we work out an arrangement. And I think I enjoy that as much as I do playing for people. It's like you hit this threshold where it's like, wait till they hear this. Wait till they get a load of this. And that's part of where the spark is, I think. So, collaboration.
So much work went into the release of your album, Pretty Bird. Can you tell us why that album marked a critical time in your life?
Well, that was the record that sort of came out of this process for me. And so we kept just adding songs. Some of them were old songs, some were new songs, some were songs I'd known and never sung. And then I thought, I'm going to go back in the studio. So, when you go in the studio, it's like your voice is blown up 100 times as big as you hear it in your ears. You can hear every crack, every waver. And I thought, I haven't been in the studio since I've been through this. So I need to make sure that I make this record with a producer who I feel really safe with. And my old friend, Tim O'Brien, who is a musical genius, and he's the closest thing I have to a musical brother. I called him, I said, would you do this with me? And he was like, yeah. And mostly because he's brilliant. He just has this way of making you feel like what you're doing is the best. It's the most beautiful version of you that he could imagine hearing. That's kind of his thing.
Well, what a nice person to have in your life during that time where you not only needed that, but it provided even more feedback and a fabulous product that everybody can enjoy.
Yeah, it was very, very sweet.
So you received a Grammy nomination for Coal, which was produced by Marty Stewart. And I wondered about those songs, since they're rooted in coal mining. Does this harken back to your roots?
Yeah, I'm from West Virginia, and both my grandfathers were coal miners. Both my parents grew up in coal mining towns, and the only reason my dad didn't go in the mines was at the last minute. The night before registration for the local college, my uncle called him over to his house and said, you want to go to college? He said, yeah, but who has the money? He says, you just go over there and register tomorrow and I'll pay for it. And you can work it off in the store. He owned the general store in town. And so it changed my dad's life and really my life probably, So my parents grew up in the Depression and some of the stories were hard. My dad's toes were all crunched up because my grandfather was too proud to let him go to school without shoes on, but they couldn't afford to buy shoes when his feet would grow bigger. So for the rest of his life, he had these gnarled up feet and, just stuff like that. That was just in our lives every day. So doing these songs when I was going through and finding, it was like the greatest hits of coal, like a lot of these songs were really known by a lot of the old folk singers and stuff. They would bring up family stories and all these little bits of stories that I had heard when I was growing up got kind of knitted together into a bigger narrative. And I got to understand a little more about, I went to take pictures up in my hometown and my longtime manager was with me and he said, Kathy, I just used to think of coal as my parents' story and not mine. And he said, Kathy, you grew up in the shadow of coal. And I'm like, what are you talking about? The mines have shut down where my grandfather worked. And he said, look at that. And it was a coal-fired electrical plant that had been built when I was a kid. And it's the biggest one east of the Mississippi.
Yeah.
And you can see it from everywhere. And the steam from the cooling towers goes so far you can see it for, the next counties over, all around. And I never put it together. It was just the place that got built that everybody was happy there'd be new jobs for everybody. It's like a lot of stuff just fell into place about my own story when I made that record.
So interesting. There are a lot of things that you see through the lens of childhood, and then all of a sudden, at some point as an adult, it clicks and you see it totally through a different perspective and sometimes it's a harsh reality.
Yeah. And, for me too, I have to say that I think music is a great tool for that. Like a lot of light bulbs that came from digging around in these songs and the stories behind them. And, mountaintop removal was sort of running rampant in West Virginia, a really radical form of strip mining. And then I was asked to sing at a rally to protest this and stuff. And I went looking for a song and I found a song that wound up on the next album that was written in the 70s about the exact same thing. The stories were exactly the same. And I thought, oh my God, I can be at this rally and sing this song about somebody turning on their tap water and black water coming out of it and not being able to get anyone's attention to do anything about it. Only that was 30 years ago, 40 years ago. And all I need to say is this is a song that was written in 1972 by Gene Ritchie. And then the song does all the work. And people realize, oh, this is still going. This is exactly what's still going on. And music can sometimes get in the back door without beating somebody over the head with something.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And I feel like there's another song that you've recorded and it's gotten a lot of attention. And it's really interesting, the kind of the way our conversation has developed, because the song Where Have You Been, that Ken Burns took notice of as well, has been such a kind of a life-changing song for so many people. And I'd love for you to talk not only a little bit about the song and how it became such a statement piece, but also the discovery that Ken Burns had with it and some of the things you've done with him since then.
So Where Have You Been is a song that my husband wrote. He wrote it with our friend Don Henry. My husband's name is John Vesner. And, you know, there's this moment when you're dating and you start to tell each other the really important stories of your life, when you kind of cross a line into getting a little bit more serious with each other. So he told me this story about his grandparents. And when he got to the end of the story, he just burst into tears. And I thought, oh, this man is so sweet. You know, what a tenderhearted man. And the story was that his grandma got a bladder infection or a UTI or something and went in the hospital, fell out of bed, broke her hip, and had to stay in the hospital. And she finally had been away from familiar surroundings for so long that she didn't recognize anybody. She quit talking, she quit eating, and she was just kind of waiting to die. And in the meantime, his grandfather goes into the same hospital on a different floor because he has a brain tumor. My husband goes to visit, and he goes to his grandfather's room, and he says to the nurses, anybody brought him to see him? And they said no, and he got permission. He loaded him up in a wheelchair, and he brought him in. And she recognized him from the moment he was wheeled into the room. And she didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. She just looked at him and looked at him and looked at him. And finally, she just said, where have you been? And that was the story that he told me when he burst into tears. And so he wrote this song and played it for me. And when the first chorus went around, I knew what the song was going to be about. So a lot of people knew about the song and heard it, but thought it was too sad. And me too. I thought it was too sad. I thought, I can't do this song. People would be sobbing. People would be, people were just having these big reactions to it. And finally, I saw him play it at the Bluebird one night in a showcase. When he finished the song, there was just this moment of like nothing at the end of the song. There was just this 2 or 3 seconds of silence before anyone clapped. And you could hear people sobbing all over the room. And I thought, oh my God, this song needs to be heard. I don't care if it's sad. People need to hear this song. And I think I felt his vulnerability at writing such a personal moment in a song that I was too vulnerable for him to think about bringing that song into it. Like, I just thought it was just brave beyond what I could imagine. But I saw it through the eyes of this audience. And I was just like, I have to do this song. This song needs to be heard, and I'm going to do it. And I recorded it. And then we put it on the end of a record, and I started playing it in my show. And in the middle of the show, this song no one had ever heard before would stop the show. The audience would start clapping, and then they wouldn't stop. Oh. And then they'd be on their feet every single night. And so I played in New York, and the New York branch of my record label came out, and they saw it. And usually you're fighting the record label to get something already put out on the radio or something, unusual. And they started pushing for it. And the record label was like, we have to put this out. And they did. And I don't think it went top 5. Might not have even gone top 10. But it's easily my best known song. And it taught me a good lesson, which is you can have a number 1 record that everybody forgets. But, the song connects where the song connects. And the numbers they only mean so much. I'd have 10 Where Have You Beens and never have another number 1 and be very, very happy.
And rightly so. So Ken Burns selected it to be in his documentary on country music. And to me, that not only was another level of validation, but every time I hear it, it brings tears and emotion, of course, because it's such an amazing story.
Yeah. It's a profound thing to have that kind of connection with another person where you can bring somebody back to their world just by recognizing being together. And it's a very simple song, and it's also about something very profound and universal.
I think it's going to withstand the test of time for sure. Music has a way of healing and really uniquely connecting people. And not only has your singing and voice been a powerful way for you to communicate, and you're still doing that all the time to inspire and connect others, but I wonder what you would say about why our voices are so important.
I don't write a lot. I'm more of a song interpreter than a songwriter. I think of myself as a singer who sometimes writes. My husband is a writer who sometimes sings. He can't not write songs. But I did write a song about, and the hook line was, it's the sound of your voice calling my name. Like that is an imprint on us. And like when my mom died of Alzheimer's, and at the end when she didn't know me anymore, I thought, yeah, but I have a unique voice. And somewhere in her, she'll know that she knows this voice. And actually, she couldn't make a sentence, she couldn't recognize anybody, but she could still sing all the verses to You Are My Sunshine with me.
Oh, how special.
And I would get right down in front of her, and we would just look each other in the eye, and she could remember all the verses, second verse, third verse. She'd just look at me and sing. And I thought, there is something about music and about the sound of the human voice together. Singing together is just the most ordinary thing in the world, to get a guitar and a bunch of us sing a song together. And it is a portal into something that's so primal and connecting beyond just words or even our ability to recognize each other. And I've gotten to learn that by doing that for my whole life since I was in the Scouts, in school. And I think it's just a primal connection. I've heard her voice for every moment of my waking life since the day I was born. And she's heard mine for every moment of my life that I was in this world while she was still here. There's probably a level in my brain that recognizes that and lights up even when nothing else is lit up, it's just so deep in me.
That's beautiful. And Alzheimer's can be such a difficult thing to watch any individual, I guess at any age, deal with dementia and Alzheimer's because the disconnects and the lack of recognition. And I've heard other people talk about music being the ultimate connector. So thanks for sharing that story. If this conversation is motivating you to squeeze the day, learn more about getting involved in your home community, to deliver food, to volunteer, or to just get active. If you'd like to learn more, visit 54.org. That's FIFTYFORWARD.org. There's so much to gain by helping others. Now, let's get back to our show. Tell us about Mountain Stage. You're doing something a little bit different now, and in one way, I see it almost as a way maybe to lift up new artists and connect performers in new ways.
So Mountain Stage is an NPR show, national show, that's carried on about between 250 and 300 stations around the country. And it started in my hometown in 1983. And 1983 is when I signed my record deal in Nashville. So I was the hometown girl done good. And I would come through every time I would put out a new record, I would come through and play on Mountain Stage. And Mountain Stage kept growing and my career kept growing. So the arc of my career is sort of the arc of Mountain Stage. And Mountain Stage just hit its 40th anniversary last year. Larry Gross, who is the founder and the host of Mountain Stage, they'd been looking for someone to hand the reins to, and they couldn't find anyone who was a good fit. And I did a couple of guest hosting spots, and they were like, Abby, you kind of get it. You kind of get it in a way that a lot of other people don't. And it's my hometown, so I have a connection to the sense of place and the culture. And a big part of it is bringing, like, not the stereotypical hillbilly culture, but real West Virginia hospitality and its particular flavor to the artists and to people around the country. And so they said, would you want to take over the show and become the host? And I was like, oh, I don't know. I mean, I'm in my 60s now, and I don't know if I want. I was thinking I'd slow down, but I sat down and I realized it ticked all the boxes of the things I think are important. Music, West Virginia culture, hospitality, and not just music, but a more in-depth presentation of artists and artists that aren't necessarily mainstream. And I thought, I think I have to do this. And it challenges me and it uses my particular skill set in a different way. So I said yes. The interesting thing for me about it in my 60s is that for my whole life, my music career, quote unquote, has been about me and what I want to say and how my voice is and how I think about music. And now I get to just love on other musicians. And I finally realized that in trying to make this decision, I was like, well, I don't know. It's really, at the end of the day, it's about music and love. I mean, why would you say no? And I have young musicians come through and say, my mom is blowing up my phone right now. Can I take a picture with you? I grew up listening to you on every vacation. It's just, and I don't think I would ever hear those stories had I not said yes to this. And to get to see a little reflection that I did put some music in the world that meant something to someone.
That's so beautiful. It feels in some ways like not life has come full circle, but definitely your talents and your purpose is being used in a new way now. And so many people will relate to that next chapter, and maybe they shouldn't say no. Maybe they shouldn't say no to different opportunities and stretch.
Well, yeah. And interestingly, I wasn't looking for it. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't thinking like, one of the things that's been interesting just sort of in these conversations I've had in the context of what season of life I'm in, I realize I'm not thinking in terms of like, what's my third act? What am I going to do next? And it's always been this way. I don't know if I just got lucky or what, but for me, even when I was really young, how I got to Nashville was I was a physics and chemistry major in college, and I had skipped a grade in school. I was like this brainiac, but I loved music, and I thought, I can do this. I can do math and science and engineering and any of that if I want to, but I feel different when I do music. And I had a chance to move to Nashville, and I thought, I need to go find out if this is going to work or not. Because if it isn't, I can always go back to the other stuff. And so for me, it's still listening into that voice inside that's like, yeah, that feels right. It's like an inner compass, and it doesn't go away, but you have to. For me, it's not an intellectual, like, what makes sense for me to do? It's really like listening inside for the subtle nudges.
I think you have such a gift, but the science, wow, who knew that was part of your background in your life? I want to talk a little bit about, so this podcast was launched by 50 Forward, which is a local Nashville-based nonprofit, but we have a strong connection and a passion not only for others and connecting older adults with resources, but we have a longstanding relationship with public television, Nashville Public Television here.
Yeah.
And you are very active with them in matters related to aging. And I'm wondering, not only when you decided to, I guess, assume that role, what you expected, and then how that has played out. What sort of things have been aha moments for you in the Aging Matters series and topics and discoveries?
I did it as a service project just because I love public television. I love Nashville Public Television. And I was proud. I'm like, the baby boomers that population bubble is getting older, and that's going to change the dynamics of our society. And they're ahead of the event trying to talk about it and put information out that people can use as resources. I'm like, I am in to help in any way I can with this. And it's interesting that it's come at this moment in my life, in my 50s and 60s, where as the host, I'm not 20. And I'm in the process that they're talking about. I've learned a bunch. They interviewed me for one of them as a participant. And I think really all of these are online and available. So if people are like, oh my gosh, my parents are getting older, or everything's suddenly shifted or changed, there are resources. And it's just so important. It's so important. Part of why I really like it too is like, I've never been one of those people that's like, I'm going to defy age. I'm like, bring it on. Let my hair grow gray. What are my eyes going to do? Like, I'm not getting Botox. I want to see how big the lines get in between my eyebrows. I just want to I want to lean into it and inhabit it. And I have these role models as women that have done that. And when you look them in the face, you can see their life experience and you can see the light. And they look old and young at the same time. To me. And that's how I want to be. Like, I am all about it. I'm like, bring it on. okay, this is 64. How do I make 64 how do I lean into what 64 is? I don't want to look 20. I want to experience every stage of life that I'm in while I'm in it.
Very nice. And I think you serve as a model for all of us. Just for fun, we have a few speed round questions that I think it's just fun to get quick responses from our guests related to different things in your life. So I'm curious what hobbies you enjoy.
I love hiking. I love walking in the woods in any kind of situation where there's not cars on a street close by. And I spend hours and hours and hours doing that at a couple of different places here in Nashville. Love to cook. And that's just kind of always been an anchoring thing. I think maybe because you can't cook on the road. There's no kitchen. You can't go grocery shopping. And, so I think it always grounds me when I get home. Those are probably the two biggest things.
What's one thing in life you wish you could do over?
I mean, I think I could make a list, but every mistake I made gifted my life in its own way. So I don't think it's about not making what you would call a mistake or having regrets. I think it's really, I always tell when I talk to the Berklee kids, the kids from Berklee College of Music come to Nashville every year, and I spend a couple hours talking to them. And I'm like, it's not the what, it's the how. It's not what happens to you, it's how you deal with it that makes all the difference. And so I think there's a lesson there, and I wouldn't go back and mess with it.
Mm-hmm. How does Kathy Mattea define the music of Kathy Mattea?
Oh, boy. Hopefully honest, some kind of substance to it, easily accessible, conversational.
So then I have two questions that we ask all of our guests. One is, what is the one piece of advice your parents or an older adult might have given you that at the time you thought, that is so silly, but it rings true to you today in your everyday life?
I was gifted with smart parents. My mom didn't get to go to college, but she was absolutely brilliant. And both my parents said to me for my whole childhood, you can do whatever you want. You can be whatever you want. Like I was not told, you're going to have a Florida because you're a woman or you're from West Virginia and people are going to, it was just like, you just keep going. You try this stuff because you can do it. And then I'm in college studying physics and chemistry and engineering with a 3.8 grade point average. And I call them up and say, I think I'm going to move to Nashville. I'm like, sorry, you planted the seed and now you have to live with it. And God bless them, they came from, such poverty that an education, a college education was everything. And so, but they stuck with me and they let me do it my way.
Good for them, and good for them to try to guide you. But I think you found your voice on many levels, and I think there's a lot of examples that you share that are really meaningful for others. What is it that you do to squeeze the day?
I realized at a certain point, I am not a morning person. I'm just not a morning person. I'm not going to get up at 6 and be raring to go. I wake up slow. I drink a cup of coffee. I do a little meditation. I do a little bit of yoga. And I take my time. And sometimes that's 30 minutes and sometimes it's 2 hours. And if I do that, the rest of my day is better.
Thank you, Kathy, for joining us. Your story is so inspiring. And for everyone listening, as I leave you today, I'm sending you all a big squeeze. Until next time. Squeeze the Day is made possible through listeners like you. If you enjoy this podcast, please help us continue to share inspiring stories of older adults and visit 54ward.org. That's FIFTYFORWARD.org to make a contribution. And now I challenge everyone listening to go squeeze the day.